Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion on gender and illiberalism. For us as the Heinrich-Böll Foundation, it is a great honor to be a partner of the Budapest Forum, and I'm very much looking forward to moderate the next hour or 75 minutes with so great distinguished guests and experts. During our discussion, we will explore why and how illiberal political parties, movements and governments use and implement anti-gender, anti-feminist, anti-LGBTIQ rhetoric, strategies and mobilizations. We will focus on the developments in Hungary and Poland, and our original plan was to also include Slovakia, but unfortunately our speaker, Lucia Plaváková, had to cancel her participation. Well, you know that she is Secretary General and Vice Chairwoman of the Progressive Slovakia Party, and she had to stay in Bratislava because she is involved in quite complicated and complex post-election negotiations and developments. So we say hello to her and we hope to meet her on another occasion, and of course we wish her good luck. So when having a look at the election campaigns in Slovakia and Poland during the last weeks, I think it is very obvious that we have a lot to discuss. It is clear that there is a link between illiberalism and anti-gender politics, and gender scholars describe actually different anti-gender manifestations in Central and Eastern Europe, from opposition to gender, via gender policy backsliding to state anti-feminism. However, I would of course like to emphasize that the rise of illiberal actors with an anti-gender, anti-rights actually agenda is a phenomenon which is not restricted to Central and Eastern Europe. So it is of course important to also include insights from other EU member states. Beyond the analysis of the current situation, we would also like to discuss possible solutions or counter strategies, and I think I speak on behalf of many in this room when I say that it is often frustrating to see how dominant illiberal actors are in determining the political agenda and discourse. So the question is what to do about it? How can we avoid being driven by those actors? And how can we actually make sure to push the agenda of gender equality forward? Magdalena. Poland will vote a new parliament, and the date is 15 October. The PiS government is very known for its anti-feminist politics, and actually we can see that reproductive rights play a key role during the campaign for the opposition. Actually, we are now looking forward to hear your analysis on how illiberal actors, first and foremost the PiS government, has dismantled democracy by implementing anti-feminist politics.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm very happy that gender made it to a broader debate about de-democratization and re-democratization. And I think that the question you ask is the question that is the subject of books and dissertations, and so it's very hard to answer this in 5 minutes that we have. So I'm going to support myself with some notes that I made. I think that Poland is an interesting case when we talk about gender backlash and in connection to state democracy. On one hand, Poland is one of the severe cases of democratic backsliding or de-democratization, and it, from what was thought to be a consolidated democracy into illiberal democracy or electoral autocracy. At the same time, Poland is also a scene for the revival of the grassroots pro-participatory democracy movements, including, or I dare to say it, led by women's and feminist movements, who most recently in 2016 and 2020, as many of you maybe know, were able to mobilize masses against the further restrictions of the abortion law in so-called black protests or women's strikes. With upcoming elections, in which women's rights are one of the crucial issues at stake, and the elections are this Sunday, it seems that the fate of democracy and gender equality is to be decided within the next few weeks in Poland. But to answer the question why illiberal turn took place in Poland, as a social historian, I think we would need to think and look back into the past a little bit. More specifically, I would argue that, that we need to look into what happened after the 1999 turn towards the liberal democracy and the period of transformation where turn to illiberal democracy coincided with the severe restriction of the women's rights, particularly the abortion law. As some of you may know, in 1993, the law was restricted in the name of the so-called abortion compromise, reached between, interestingly, post-communist and post-solidarity elites and the Catholic Church, but above the heads of the majority of the society that supported the abortion referendum, which meant the participatory democracy. Symbolically, I would argue, this was the moment when the model of formal democracy, formal liberal democracy, based in consolidation of the democratic institutions and consensus reached by the elites, was chosen over the participatory model, promoted by or promised by the Solidarity movement during the 1980s. And I'm talking about the history because the newest wave of anti-gender politics date back as scholars to 2012, and the opposition to Istanbul Convention built on these events and sentiments. And actions of anti-gender actors are often represented as a form of protest against the hegemony of formal democracy based on this elite exchange, and the hegemony that is put into questions not only by the right-wing actors, but also by the left-wing as well. Since 2012 in Poland, gender mainstreaming and the Council of Europe's Istanbul Convention were framed as contradictory to traditional family values like elsewhere in Poland, in Eastern Europe and Western Europe and Middle East as well. But more importantly, from my point of view, they were also represented as introduced in a top-down manner by cultural outsiders. What is particularly visible at the earlier stage of anti-gender campaigns in Poland, but elsewhere as well, is the use of the master colonial frame. And Elżbieta Korolczuk and Agnieszka Graf are talking about it in their book, representing gender equality as a foreign imposition, a form of neo-colonialism, which can be compared to totalitarianism and most profoundly to communism. And here is where the anti-gender and anti-communist sentiments are intersecting within this whole process. Positioning the struggle as a local and authentic opposition to global attack on traditional lifestyle was a crucial part of the ultra-conservative political strategy, generating the sense of community, and I want to emphasize that, which was lost during the transformation, was another one. And now to the question of how. I would argue, following other scholars, that over the last 20 years in Poland, we underwent a gradual symbolic thickening of the political public culture through the intensification of the presence of Catholic and radical conservative discourses. Again, Elżbieta Korolczuk and Agnieszka Graf call this process opportunistic synergy, a dynamic that allowed for political alliances between various political actors that not always have that much in common, but that synergy allowed for eventually a large-scale elite exchange in various spheres of social life, including government, academia, cultural and civil society, and this is what is happening right now. So it's like a takeover of the state, pretty much. Several strategies were used during that reposition of the right-wing groups as legitimate actors at the international and national level, and these are the strategies that we know that they circulate transnationally. I'm just going to name them, maybe we'll have more time to discuss them. This is the reversal strategy that consists of reclaiming the victim status by the oppressed majority, appropriation of human rights language, smear campaigns against individual people and institutions, and most importantly, from the point of view what is happening and what is the state of art right now in Poland, the strategy of legitimization, pushing the right-wing and radical nationalistic agenda into the political mainstream. And I'm going to finish in a minute. It is important to note that while the first phase of gender backlash, the attacks were focused on the abstract category of gender or gender ideology, and most recently, and after 2015 specifically, they are focused and target specific groups, namely LGBTQ communities, and those attacks are representative of the state or institutional homophobia and transphobia, and some examples of how the state really acts against those groups. I'm going to give you right now. In 2020, during the presidential campaign, the president and the candidate for the president, Andrzej Duda, stated that LGBTQ are ideology, not people. At the same time, the anti-LGBT campaign moved to the local level. As of late June 2020, and some of you probably heard about it, approximately 100 Polish municipalities had adopted resolutions declaring themselves LGBT-free zones. They were later denounced under the threat of the withdrawal of the EU funding. At the same time, we experienced physical attacks of the members of the community during the Pride marches in Białystok in Lublin in 2019. And the LGBT community member was detained in Warsaw in summer 2020. And I'm going to finish here, but I want to emphasize and stress that this is not the situation in which those attacks and this situation is met with the passivity of the groups that are the subject of the attack. And I hope we will have a time to talk about how these groups and those the communities actively counteract and create the alternative propositions of what democracy or redemocratization can be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, also for sticking to the time. Réka, anti-gender, anti-LGBTIQ mobilization and laws actually have been one of the main characteristics of the Fidesz government. So how do you assess this link between gender and anti-democratic developments, and where do you see similarities and differences in comparison to what Magda just described?
Thank you very much.
Does this work? Otherwise.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak on the panel, and I would like to express the same sentiment that talking about this phenomenon is very important from the point of view of the democratization and democratization in the region. I represent a women's rights organization, which is a big network, part of a European network, the European Women's Lobby. And what we have seen in the region, but also more widely at women's rights NGOs, is that we have been exposed to a lot of challenges with the rise of illiberalism. And what has been problematic regarding the effects on women, on society and gender equality, but also on civil society. I could not argue with your very precise scholarly description of what has happened, although in its flavor, its actual outcomes have been different in Hungary. But I agree that in Poland, the very, very important emphasis on reproductive rights has been a decisive factor. Whereas in Hungary, I think in the whole process, the actual aspect and the concept of gender has been picked consciously by the government to manipulate public opinion and to whip up sentiments that would bring together people who would believe that being anti-gender and anti-gender equality is somehow pro-tradition, although this is a pseudo-conservative argument in my opinion that can bring together the voters, but does not meet with the basic instincts of the people who I think are more pro-human rights. So in the whole process, as we experienced it from the women's rights perspective, it started in the beginning, or in the middle of the 1910s, when both gender equality, women's rights, and civil society fighting for human rights and women's rights were attacked and singled out by the government, and we had to undergo scrutiny, unexplained tax audits and other kinds of audits, for example, which meant first an administrative burden, but then as it unfolded, we realized that our access to funding became threatened in the process as well. So we also saw that the anti-gender rhetoric had a different shape in the different countries, but a group of social and political scientists grouped together and kind of solved and followed in real time as it was unfolding. It was very interesting. So we were kind of waiting for it to enter Hungary, and it did. Finally it did in 2017 especially, or from then on. And one of the areas that you have also mentioned, and one of the treaties that has fallen prey to this, or victim, was the Istanbul Convention. And here you can really see that, that the concept of gender was picked out of it, and kind of demonized, and as opposing traditional family value, although it was never, and it has never been the aim of this convention to either question traditional family values or to introduce certain ideas about gender into legislation that is non-traditional or non-heteronormative, although there shouldn't be a problem with that. So we would think that it's a very good example that first the Istanbul Convention was signed by Hungary just before the elections in 2014. And then the political landscape changed, the intention of the government changed, and then it started to be criticized, and the rhetoric was whipped up about the concept, and then basically it did not, the Hungary didn't practically withdraw, and cannot withdraw really from the signature. We are still signatories to the Istanbul Convention, but in 2020, the Hungarian government and the parliament adopted a political resolution that it would not support its ratification, and it would do everything at European level to object to its European ratification, which luckily did not succeed, and as of the beginning of this month, the EU is actually a member to the Istanbul Convention. I would maybe add to this that, of course, there would be reception on the side of society to this, to these processes, and I think we must not forget that in Hungary, in the global context and in the European context, the economic situation of women has been rather, actually pointing towards this, that there would be an acceptance of more traditional values, but at the same time, the family, work and family balance has not really been solved, only at a rhetorical level.
Thank you so much. Dénes, I'm very much looking forward to your assessment, and as a poet and writer, I would actually like to pose a specific question to you. Illiberal actors very often frame their mobilization and strategies as a fight against, I quote, gender ideology and gender language. So how do you assess the developments, and what role does language play?
Thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to say thank you for the invitation, and it's an honor to be a part of this discussion. And to be honest, I'm getting a little bit nervous, because if I look around, everyone else is dealing with these topics as professionals, and as you said, I'm a poet and a writer, so I'm a non-professional.
But you are very important as a poet and writer to this discussion. I would like to stress that.
But luckily, I work also as a journalist, so maybe I can use this experience. My first thought was that if I am an outsider in this discussion, and then this immediately raised the question whether it is possible to be an outsider on a social level if we are talking about gender issues or gender politics in the illiberal context. And I have to say that it's not possible nowadays in Hungary. So even if you spend your days in a family that is in a family form that is, let's say, supported or expected by the government, still you can feel that you have this oppression from the liberal government, because they try to prescribe the rules of the family members or of different genders in the society. And also, I'm sure that everyone here in this room has heard about the child protection law in Hungary, which the government likes to refer to as a pedophile law, and the opposition side refers to it as a homophobic law. And it is truly homophobic, no doubt about it. Lately this was mentioned most often because of the book wrapping issue in Hungary, and the restrictions concerning bookstores all around the country. And all of these are just the tip of the iceberg, I have to say. The main issue, or the language-related issue, if I can say that, is when we hear about gender, and we hear the phrase gender, and we always hear this word from the government officials all the time. So they are talking about that more than any activists in the country, let's say. When we start to talk about gender, we have to defend ourselves right away. So this is the situation towards the government or the central power, that they steal or have stolen the phrase. They use it all the time. So when we start to speak about it, we have to defend ourselves. So we are right away on a defensive side of the question. The identity politics of the illiberal government has not started yesterday, as you mentioned. It started in 2007, or even before that in 2013, when they stated in the constitution that, as I remember, that mother is a female and father is a male. It was in 2013. It was later, maybe. But it's in the constitution now. So how did the phrase gender and this whole issue became such an important tool in the hands of the government? I would say through simplification at first, and through misrepresentation, and that's why we are forced to almost over-explain the phrase. So that's what the government strategy looks like when they use the phrase. they are talking about gender roles in everyday life as let's say a priori roles, and they are not dealing with the fact that these roles are not immutable and they are constantly evolving. But the government and the illiberal message is this. It comes from the simplification all the time. So what I said, that father is a male and mother is a female, that's their key approach to this question. So when we want to understand the approach to this question of the extreme right, where I include the Hungarian government, of course, we have to keep this fact in mind, that it's in a big part it's a language question or a rhetoric question. So an interesting fact that although we can see and hear all the time and every day in Hungary the anti-LGBTQ and anti-gender campaign, according to the latest surveys, the support for example, for the same-sex marriage is definitely increasing in the country, which is an interesting paradox situation. And if we want to understand this, maybe we will understand that the illiberal message is, in this case, is going against the real social needs. So the society is more open towards these questions than the government. So we have to talk about this paradox, I think, more, because this dialogue can lead to the exposure of the emptiness of the illiberal rhetorics. And I would say, in a way, that's why we are here. And this is my...
Thank you so much, Dénes. I would like to give you the opportunity to respond, to react to what was said until now. But I would like to add one question. Well, illiberal political thinking argues, and we heard that, against the value and principles of equal freedom. And additionally, it is actually in favor of a society based on traditional hierarchies between men and women. And I'm actually wondering why this is attracting many young voters. So please react to what was said until now, and I would be very pleased to hear more about your assessment of the young voters, the young population. Why do they feel attracted by this illiberal mobilization? Would you like to start, Réka?
Yes, thank you. I think it can be seen that there is a support for these, but it's probably based on the fact that in the political scene, it is what they see as value nowadays, the youth. So this is maybe not so much connected to religion anymore, but they actually see it more unfolding around them, because in our mediated reality, I think political discourse has really become part of our discourses, even on social media. So I think it is probably natural that people seek values in their when they grow up, but I would not say that there is no parallel also movement, and I see it very, very strongly that young people are receptive to the idea of equality. I see it among my own children's generation very, very strongly. So it's they kind of breathe it in with their education as well. Even in a country like Hungary, they are also open to this. They often have educators who are open to this. So I think both trends might be there. We are just here to support
Yes.
the equality trend.
Exactly, and we will talk about the strategies to do so in another round. But Magdalena, please feel free to react to what was said, and also the young generation.
As far as I know, in Poland, this is not the case, that the young generation votes for or has the affiliation to lean towards the right-wing or illiberal values. The picture is more complicated. Young people either not vote, or their vote is divided by gender. So young women are prone to vote left-wing or not vote at all, and young men are prone to vote on the parties. There's a party in Poland, it's called Konfederacja, which is the party that comes from the neo-fascist maybe movement, but it combines a very liberal, neoliberal economic stance with the very conservative values. And I would argue several things are happening here from the sociological point of view. On one hand, we have the big group of women who were protesting in 2016 and 2020, and if you look into what is happening at the level of political party programs, this is not represented in the political party programs on that scale. So these women do not have really people to vote for. And if any of you follow Polish politics, last week we had the March of the Million Hearts, and it was a very telling story of how this was the march that was supposed to be pro-women's rights march, and in the central stage we had four men and not even one women leader, which after 2016 and 2020 seems very odd. So see, still this is not really, and this is the case where, you know, the society is kind of far more progressive than the political elites are. And in case of young people, they took part in the 2016 and 2020 pro-abortion protests, where they also were very engaged in the climate strike. And this was also not really represented in the political party programs right now. As for the men who are voting conservative, for me it is clear that while at the cultural level we in Poland seen a big, huge, fundamental social change in terms of women's gender roles, and there is a lot of conversations about what does it mean to be a woman, what feminism means, and so on and so on. There is really no discussion about what the new masculinity could mean. So these young men are oftentimes left behind, in the sense that the women at their age are no longer interested in the views and whatever they have to offer, if they have traditional values to offer, but there is no offer to them. I don't know if that's clear at all, but it seems like there is a disconnect with the group of young women and a group of young men, and there is really the only political offer for them is this neoconservative, neoliberal agenda.
Thank you so much. And of course, I didn't want to say that the majority of young people is in favor of illiberal parties, anti-democratic parties. But I think what we can see in a lot of EU member states, that we are actually surprised that there is an increasing number of young people who feel attracted, but of course it's not the majority, and I think the issue of the non-voters is very important, because this actually means that a lot of young people, or an increasing number, does not feel attracted by any offer at all. So, Dénes, what is your take on the younger generation?
Well, I think that in Hungary too, I don't think that this is a very serious issue. And if we are watching closely the struggles of the government when they are attacking schools and the school system in the last couple of months, I think it has something to do with their fear about the younger generations, and that they are not supporting their agenda. And the main problem is that they are not voting, and that they couldn't find a political party or political parties that they would vote for, and the whole system is stuck in a very depressing situation, I have to say, when the opposition parties couldn't really build themselves up because the whole system is against their progress, and the young people who would vote for opposition parties, if they would think that they can activate themselves, that they couldn't find these parties, at least in the last couple of years. But if you were following, for example, the process of closing this university, for example, or the process of the closing of the other university just across the street, the theater, Academy of Theater, the young people were very active in those cases, and now the high school students are quite active in the last couple of weeks and months, and I don't see the same kind of activism on the pro-government side from young people. Of course, there is I think a small minority of younger people who are involved in this anti-LGBTQ and anti-gender agenda, and which is interesting that the far-right parties can find a way to their younger audiences, but the Fidesz is struggling with that. So I think it's a very complicated situation, and if we are talking about this situation in Hungary, the gender issue is not in the, I think it's not in the heart of the problem or heart of the rhetorics or the anti-LGBTQ agenda of the government it is, but the equal rights and those questions which are beyond the anti-LGBTQ campaign are a little bit less visible nowadays.
Mm-hmm. So now let's turn to the question how we can develop counter strategies, and you, Magdalena, you already touched upon it, so I would like to give you the floor, because I think there are, of course, and this is something we have to emphasize, there are positive examples we can learn from, and I think this is part of the story that we have to share them. But you also already mentioned a lot of dilemma we are confronted with, you know, the self-victimization, the fact that we are in a constant defending mode. So what are successful strategies? What do we have to do, and how can we act together to push gender equality forward? Magdalena, now you have a few minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to start by saying that I think the moment in which we are in Poland right now is the moment of the transformation from reacting to being proactive. And as I wanted to argue, as I tried to argue at the beginning of this conversation, that this kind of strive for the pro-participatory democracy was not absent for the last 20 years or 30 years in Poland. It was kind of brewing underground alongside or alternatively to the developments that we are discussing here now. So it was there for the last 30 years, but I think the last probably 7 years, from 2015, we see the revival of the pro-participatory democracy movements, both mainstream and feminist. And I think, and I'm going to discuss what happens on the feminist side. And I think this is happening at two levels. On one hand, we have the level of the street demonstrations, and as I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, 2016 black protests and women's strike, and 2020 protests pro-abortion, I would call them. They proved three things, I think. One, that a feminist movement in Central and Eastern European context is able to mobilize a critical mass and to kind of is able to provide the means to redraw the political frontier and kind of provide the hope for constructing the new political majority. Because during those protests, you could see that they were very intersectional. They were not only talking about women's rights, but also the climate justice, workers' rights, and so on and so on. So they were very intersectional, and this is one thing. Second, they were able to do what the democratic oppositional side was not able to do for a number of years, which is they were able to organize or mobilize the emotions. So there was this affective component of it, and the 2020 protests were really built on the shared feeling of anger, pretty much, and you could see a fury against what is happening, and the political political insult. If you could see the slogans of this, there was a lot of political insults, and people were angry. But at the same time, I think there was also mobilization of hope, and I think importantly, those protests were also able to tap into the new values, I would say. Next to the values of freedom and equality, that are the values that we were talking about since the transformations. We have the conversation about, or return to the conversation about solidarity, care, social justice, empathy. And so these are like the new set of values that these movements are kind of reintroducing to the public sphere. And the third, I think they were able, believe it or not, to switch, I think, to introduce a social change. And I'm not sure what's going to happen after Sunday. So, you know, it might not happen. But if you look at the level of the rhetoric of the electoral campaign that is happening right now in Poland, women's rights and gender equality is you cannot avoid that anymore. So you actually see that the gender equality is part of the conversation about democracy at different levels, including the level of the conversation of why women do not vote for oppositional parties. But I think, and this is one level, and the second level, I think, and this is something that's oftentimes omitted when we talk about the redemocratization and de-democratization, is what is happening outside of the street protests. And I would argue, and I think someone said it already in the previous sessions, that if we want to understand how to reclaim democracy in the context of Poland, Central Eastern Europe, we have to look into what is happening in the margins of not in the big cities, but in the provinces, so to speak. And feminist research is proving, and I was co-author of the report that was published in 2020 about what is happening. And there are some very interesting developments there, and I'm only going to mention few. One is that we have this, the activism that's an example of kind of everyday activism, practical activism. So this is the activism that's very close to the issues that are related to real problems of the small communities. So oftentimes they refer to material issues, but also in case of women, to like very mundane issues such as we don't have a place to meet. But this also, all of the women that we talk to are talking also about the fact that this is the overwhelming, that what they are acting against is the overwhelming of the gender-based violence, and the violence have different registers and happens at the different levels. And importantly, so what we learn from it is that the communities are not passive in the realities that they are living, that they are experiencing, and they're not passive in a phase of the oppression from the state. And second of all, I think importantly, these mobilizations, they change the focus of what is important. And I think especially during the last few years of when we experienced the poly crisis related to COVID, related to human immigration crisis at the Polish-Belarusian border, and then the war, we see that there is the deficit of care, and the emphasis is being put on social reproduction, understood as a kind of caring for maintaining life, not only in the sense of, reproduction, understand as a biological process, but also all of these things that are being done to maintain people's lives. And I don't have time to talk about it, but I think that this is a lot of those groups are preoccupied with kind of organizing around those issues. And the third thing that I would say is that they manage to be very capacious in the sense that there is a space for various types of feminisms there. So there is a space for liberal feminism, there is a space for intersectional feminism, queer activism, and so on. But also what the civil society, I think, in Poland is managed to do over the last 7 years is to build the so-called solidarity infrastructures, where different movements use each other resources and material resources, but also human resources to support each other causes. So we have this coalition politics happening. And so this is the positive side of it, but one has to also mention the negative of it, that in the face of the fact that this has been 8 years of this mobilizing, a lot of activists are burnt out. And I think unless we start to take care of the people who are, mobilizing for different causes over the last 7 years and managing different crises, this will not end in a success. And I think what is missing is still the political mainstream recognizing those, mundane struggles as important to the issue of de-democratization, but also recognizing the fact that we have to have resources to kind of regenerate, so to speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to mention that I am pleased to take a few questions in a minute, so please already prepare your questions. And to get a better impression of the audience, I would like to ask you to raise your hands for those who are based in Hungary. Who is based in Hungary? Thank you so much. Who is based outside of Hungary, but within the European Union? Thank you so much. Who is based outside the European Union? Okay, thank you so much. It's very good to, actually have an impression, and I would really like you to contribute to the discussion, to raise questions, to give comments, because, as I said, this is not a problem, a discussion only focusing on Central and Eastern Europe. And I have to tell you, Magda, there's so much to learn from Poland, also for France, for Italy, for Germany. And I am a little bit frustrated after the elections. I don't know if you followed the elections in the state of Hesse and Bavaria, because you could see that the results of AfD were actually shocking. So this is why I think we have to also discuss these questions in a cross-border exchange and develop European strategies. So Réka, I would like to ask you, and you actually already mentioned it, the problem of resources, because the concentration of power and reduced civic space affects especially women organizations. So what to do about it, and what are your experiences and insights you would like to share with us?
Well, I would like to come back to what you have said, because not just for Hungarian women's rights organizations, but I think Europe-wide, the Polish women's movement has been really exemplary. As you have said, we can learn a lot from what you can do, not just based on whether you have resources or not, but because of this, I think because there was such a strong reason to protest, it really brought people together. And I think it's different in Hungary, that the traditional as I said, pseudo-conservative and very pro-familial stance of the government and the policies related to it are not something that you can easily protest against, and that you would, because a lot of people want to live according to these values, or support these, or benefit from these. But still, it has the potential to stir sentiments. I would say, as you have mentioned, the educational-related big protests, the protests about the closing of CEU and so on. These were protests that went from one issue to the other, and so the solidarity between these protests and these movements has, in the meantime, I think, built up. And for example, it's visible from the time of the anti-LGBT referendum, which was raised by the government as an idea to have it during the elections, so at the same time as the elections, and people were mobilized around it so that the referendum would be invalid, and it was invalid in the end. So it was big enough a movement for people to take a stand against it, and to say that these were not our questions, these were not raised by the people as such. So I would also say that it's very important, before I come to the resources, to build alliances in this way as well as with politics when it's possible. So, for example, there are oppositional local governments who are really happy to implement elements of the Istanbul Convention, which is an anti-violence against women convention, by the way, because it is the golden standard for the best practice and the comprehensive approach to how to combat and prevent violence against women. And women's rights organizations have successfully done so. It's actually a kind of coalition that is unfolding still. On a European level, I think it's also important to spur European parties to take the gender equality agenda on their platforms, because as we know, it's very, we don't know about the future of the European parliamentary elections, and whether the very important gender equality strategy that was largely actually done and accomplished, as Commissioner Dalli said, whether this can be continued. It should be, I think, because it is only certain instruments that they have introduced, but they also have to be monitored in the long run. And when it comes to resources, I would just briefly say that it's very important, I think, for the donors and for the EU to realize that in environments like in Hungary, it is very hard to measure the success that women's rights and other civil society organizations do, but that they need support for their survival, because a vibrant civil society is essential for democracy.
Mm-hmm. And thank you also, Réka, for mentioning that the EU strategies, directives are very important actually in supporting the fight for gender equality. You mentioned the EU's succession to the Istanbul Convention, but Commissioner Dalli also talked about the European Care Strategy, the Pay Transparency Directive, and the LGBTIQ equality strategy. So you would say that this is a very important support for your work here in Hungary, which is, I think, a very good message. So as a journalist, as a writer and poet, what would you say? Which counter-strategies are successful? Where do we perhaps also still have a lot of question marks? And so where do we have to, come together, exchange in order to have a stronger European cooperation?
Well, yeah, when we are talking about building resistance against illiberal agendas, in Hungary, I have to say that we have to build a lot of things from the bottom up, because I would say that the society has completely fallen apart in the last couple of years. The country is segregated very much. there are different topics and different sentiments in the countryside and in the capital and in bigger cities and in the villages, and the government tries to use this kind of differences all the time as a tool, as a political tool. So they are playing against Budapest, they are playing against the bigger cities in the countryside, and you know, acting as supporters for I don't know, traditional values which can be found in villages and whatever. But it's just rhetoric. But I'm just saying that it's very hard to deal with these topics when the whole society is in a huge deficit of solidarity. And although there were moments of solidarity in the last couple of months and years when we saw these protests and youth protests and whatever, but the solidarity always was able to reach only a small part of the society. So a lot of things, for example, the closing of the CU, the closing of the theater academy, and other questions were more or less the problems of Budapest from a point of view of the countryside, and that's what the government tried to advertise, that it's not a problem for the whole society. It's only a problem for different locations, and since the society is in lack of solidarity and in lack of connection, or the feeling of being connected to each other in different places, it's very easy to control it, because there aren't enough connections on a lower level. And I would say that although I can see some things that can make me optimistic about the situation, but the whole picture is still quite dull. And I see, when we were talking about younger voters and younger generations, I see them, and I can see it, and I can understand that they are frustrated because of the government and because of the country where they live in. Also, I'm seeing the independent news outlets and the independent magazines. Only a few of them remained, but they are there. But sometimes I cannot see the connection in between them, and I cannot see on any level the connection between the frustrated audiences or masses and the political scene. There is no representation for it in Hungary nowadays. And if we would have masses, we would have topics, we would have connection, we would have the channels for it. At the end, we will find the political representation for it. But at this point, we lack almost all of it. So we have to build it up from the beginning, and it's going to take a lot of time, and it's not going to be government change in a foreseeable future. But we have to work on this. So we have to build up from and we have to support the grassroots movements and youth movements and the schools and the teachers, and there's no other option. But for the most frustrating part, in Hungary at least, is that all of these topics we were talking about, or most of these topics we were talking about, has no representation in the parliament at this point, and we have to do something with it, or we have to. I'm not saying to build up new parties, because we have a lot of new parties, but the representation is that we miss.
I think that this is a very honest and important message. I would like to open the floor for your questions and comments. I see already two. Please introduce yourself, and then please go ahead.
Thank you. I am Ben Zabari. I am an affiliate of the CU Democracy Institute, and I would like to ask further into an issue that has already been touched upon. That is, what do you think of the role of global and transnational dynamics as for this issue? Because I think it is very clear that the language of anti-gender politics is a transnational one. Like, for example, in Hungary, the government borrows from the language of the American right or Russian politics, or like the framework of anti-gender politics as an institution that is transnational. For example, if we think of the Budapest demographic summit that was like, a few weeks ago. And I would like to ask, what do you think, in what ways can the opponents of this discourse establish like meaningful institutions or transnational cooperations, like in a similar manner?
Thank you for this excellent question, and we take the second one. And please indicate me if there are others. Great. Zsuzsa, great to see you. So please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Una Haidari. I'm a journalist. This was also touched upon briefly, but what do you react to? How do you react to the fact that in so many countries in Europe, the right, the conservative right, and the far right have so many women politicians who are more visible, lead parties, win elections than they do than women of left-wing progressive leanings do, and how do you as activists or as people involved in this issue react to when detractors of women's issues say, well, that woman, that conservative far-right, right-wing woman says that this is how she wants to be represented, not the way you're doing it. How do you deal with that? Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. That's great, so many questions. So Susanna Zelen was here, but you can just go ahead. Introduce yourself. No problem, go ahead.
Hi,
this is the young generation, that's good.
Well, thank you, very flattering. My name is Kyle, I'm a junior lecturer at Maastricht University in the Netherlands. And my question's about men, and specifically something Magdalena was talking about, how it seems that the right have sort of cornered the market on masculinity. There are characters like Andrew Tate and Joe Rogan that are really defining what masculinity means for a younger generation, and that there's some kind of partisan sorting along gender, at least in the Polish perspective. So what, since this is a man's issue, do we need to do to kind of challenge this framing or contend with this, I think, crisis that men, and specifically young men, are facing around belonging and meaning and their place in society?
Great, thank you so much. So we just continue to the front. Just please pass the mic.
Hello, I'm Anna Windic, and I'm a public policy director of Momentum Movement, which is now a new liberal party in the parliament. And I just wanted to ask that it was mentioned, and it was not clear to me, that Mr. Dénes said that the representation of such issues is completely missing from the parliament, and I was just not sure if it's because of the current setup of the parliament that in the past 12 years, there have been no, in 13 years, no opposition movement because how they restructure the law, so there is no space in the parliament, or because with my party, we represent a lot of those issues that were just mentioned, or if you think that they are not like loud enough, and I just wanted to ask some clarity on that. Thank you very much.
Great, and we go for the next one.
Thank you very much. My name is József. I'm from the CU Democracy Institute, and I would like to ask you about care, which you mentioned, Magdalena, as a kind of new meeting point of various women at actually lower and community level. I think this is something very important because, as some of you mentioned, care is something actually conservative women are taking as their and representing as a very traditional idea in current gender politics. Let's say the Hungarian president, Katalin Novák, is a kind of vocal representative of how a traditional woman should live, with many kids, caring of other people, and actually not competing with men. So it's a very interesting narrative. Now we also know from research from Hungary that actually the issue of the problems of the care I mean, yeah, it's very non-partisan. Women, all kind of women really find it very problematic in their personal life, in their little communities. So I see there a connection which is not so highly political, but do you have, and I think it's for both of you, a question, build up a new narrative on this, other than what traditional politician women are representing?
Thank you so much. So a lot of questions, but you can pick the ones you would like to answer. So we have the transnational dimension, we have women politicians in far-right parties, we have the question of masculinity, how could actually the opposition act, and the care narrative. So who would like to start? Réka?
So I would like to start with the care issue, if I may, because I touched upon it briefly, but I really think that it's very important to think about care, not just in terms of individual care tasks and so on. And often women, as they progress both in their careers, they face double burden of care, looking after their children as well as their elderly parents and so on. Also, there is a problem within the European Union and within Europe of care being or carried out in a different country by migrant women, and the migration of carers from the east, from the periphery to the center. And this is done, I think, at this moment in a very unsustainable way. So this should also be considered in more detail by European politics. The European Women's Lobby has a proposition to say that care as reproductive work, it's often non-paid, but if even paid care, is not part of the productive labor, but reproduction, which is essential, which was shown by COVID as well. So this should be treated more as a priority within European policies as well. And there should be a care deal alongside the Green Deal and the Digital Deal, which would propel us into more prosperity, more equality within the societies.
So I like that idea of a care deal. I think this is a great idea. And I would now pass the floor to Magda. There are a lot of questions left, but feel free to also comment on the care question.
I think with the care issue we have the situation in which the research that is done is really meeting or proving or evidencing the theories that are being right now evolving within the feminist theories. And so I'm thinking here about two things. One is the caring democracy, but John Tronto, that idea that that as a rule of how the democracy operates, it is right now based on formal rules of justice and formal politics, and it should be based on a universal value of care. Right, and the care does not. It means all of the practices and things that we do, caring traditionally as women, but also it is the universal value that connects us in the society. And I think, like you said, COVID showed the value of care and the fact that the care is really what is the most important for the society to survive. And that relates to the second theory, which is social reproduction theory. We have Silvia Federici and Titi Bhattacharya, Susan Ferguson, who are now talking also in the context of COVID crisis and so on, about the value of the social reproduction. And you know, Central Eastern Europe can add to that, you know, the value of social reproduction in the context of the war in Ukraine, for instance. The way in which the issues related to saving life and maintaining the life are really the core issues for the society and for democracy now. So we don't necessarily have to fall into those neo-traditional conservative narratives when we talk about it, but we can kind of bring it to a different level to universalize it. And if I can comment on other issues, the transnational issue, I had it in my notes, but I cut it this morning, and I think it's a crucial issue. And of course, we know that falling into the trap of you know, exceptionalism and saying only happens in Poland, only happens in Hungary, this is unique to France, is something that we often do. But it's the research shows that this is not the right approach. I'm personally really taken by comparison between what is happening in Eastern Europe and Near East. And I think what we need to do as researchers and activists is to change the vector or like the perspective that we have, because we tend to look into the Western Europe and United States oftentimes when we discuss what is happening in Eastern Europe. And I think it would be really useful to look east and south to see how our realities are really very similar to what is happening in Egypt, in Turkey, Iran also as well. In terms of, so I'm going to just rush through all of the questions. In terms of women's politicians, it's a very interesting question, and I think from the feminist perspective, it's the question of, you know, what kind of approach we have to representation and participation of women in politics. And I think what you're referring to, we have the example of that in Poland, in which after the 2015 elections, where Peace Party, Conservative Party won, we had a woman prime minister, and she was conservative. And a lot of feminists were very disappointed because she did not represent feminism. And I think this was the way in which that whole idea of feminist essentialism in terms of representation that is really oftentimes represented in the argumentation for a quota system, when it has been said that, you know, more women in the government means, in politics means better politics, less conflict, you know, more responsibility, and so on, was debunked. I don't necessarily think that this quantitative approach is wrong all the way, because I think still the diversity even the conservative women bring into politics is important. But I think it shows that it is more about the crucial actors rather than, you know, the critical mass is not going to give us a qualitative change. And about the man and masculinity, the last thing that I want to answer, I don't really have an answer to that, but I think from the activist point of view and political point of view, I think the best strategy is to move over a little bit if men would do that as a first step and listen to marginalized groups, women, queer people, and so on, to kind of give the voice and see what would be the role as an ally. And I think, I know that this is oftentimes been said, but I think it's very hard to be done. And I see it also from my experience in the institution that I work in, that a lot of men are saying, you know, we are allies, we really support gender equality, but when it comes to real actions, like, you know, I'm going to resign from teaching this PhD course so a younger, you know, scholar can do it, female scholar, it is very hard. So I think this is the first step.
Thank you so much. So, Dénes, the floor is yours now.
Okay, first of all, about the international level, I think, yeah, this is where the EU became an important part of this discussion, and other European frameworks. But, for example, if we were talking about younger generations and students, and again, the tide is against this kind of framework now in Hungary. I'm just saying this because just a couple of months ago it became clear that most of the Hungarian university students were not allowed to enter the Erasmus program, for example, which I think was a very important framework for developing an international discussion and so on. So I think, yeah, the EU can be helpful in this question, and other NGOs and civil organizations about masculinity. I think it's a very interesting question, and it's a question that I'm quite often thinking about. And it was very interesting when you mentioned Andrew Tate and Joe Rogan. I think because before the last elections in Hungary, the Fidesz, I think they were filtering their audience, and they tried to present some similar characters to the Hungarian voters through their social media outlet. It's called Megaphone, and there were some pundits which were like, they looked like the same as Andrew Tate, and they were completely unsuccessful. So I think the traditionalism and conservatism of the Fidesz and of its voting basis is more like an old school one. So I think it's this new age conservative masculine characters aren't there on the Hungarian scene yet. Maybe in the next few years they will try to reach younger male audience, and they will try this kind of characters again. But so far they weren't very successful here. And about the issue in the parliament, I think it's really hard when one party has 2/3 in the parliament, and they have all the tools they need to suppress all the other voices, even inside the parliament. They can go out, and then the whole room will be almost empty. The head of the parliament is a terribly conservative guy, and he's always punishing the opposition side, and these kind of topics he also tries to suppress them, tries to silence them. And the other issue is that outside the parliament we don't have enough channels for this kind of topics. So the topics are there. Some politicians are really responsible, and they try to talk about these topics, but the channels are not good enough, and the parliament itself is how should I say it? I mean, there is no, it's not a serious thing right now.
Well, thank you so much. I would like to stress that I really enjoyed this discussion. Thank you for your honesty, for sharing your insights, best practice experiences, but also your doubts. I think that we have to also include them. I would like to thank the audience for the great comments and questions you had. And I think one thing is clear. We have to continue the discussions, and of course we have to hope. And Magdalena, we wish you all the best for the elections. Thank you very much once again, and hope to meet you soon. Thank you.